Hello aspirants, looking at the current affairs for 23-10-2018, the Hindu analysis. And these are the important news items to what is being picked up from the Hindu newspaper. So let's look at them in detail. The first news item, the Modi steps in as CBI begins to probe its own leadership. So here we know that it is a news which is in transition right now. It is actually a development of the news of the person Mr. Rakesh Hastana, who is actually the person who was a very big dominated person under the CBI. So he is been booked under the charges of the bribery case. As he is been booked under the charges of the bribery case, now the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the National Security Advisor Mr. Ajit Doval, they swung into the damage control, because they were just ensuring that the government's image was not being tarnished by the issues to what has been happening right now. So this is all about like CBI. They started beginning with the probing actions to what it has to be taken against Mr. Rakesh Hastana, and other person was also been arrested in return. So here Mr. Verma, he is the present CBI director Alok Verma. So he has actually briefed the Prime Minister evening about the bribery FIR filed by the agency against Mr. Hastana, because here the government, and since the Mr. Modi had called Mr. Alok to brief about the case to understand what was the case was all about and how it might damage the government in return. So here both the concerns were about the government's image setting tarnished in the matter. That was the main concern. But here, apart from that, Modi or Mr. Ajit Doval, they had not given any of the instructions how to go about with the cases. So in those ways they haven't intervened, but just that they wanted to know is the government which has been tarnished by this particular issues. So this is actually a development case, so you should know about this person Rakesh Asthana by now. So he is the one which has been arrested. So this is about the news part, that's it. And you have the brief. The next one, the Supreme Court to list review petitions today. So this was with respect to the Sabarimala verdict what the Supreme Court had given back in 28, that is on September 28. So on the eve of Dasara, the government, and since the Supreme Court was not ready to hear any of the petitions to what has been there, or even they declined to stay the judgment. They even did not take any of the calls on staying the judgment, and they said that they would be coming back on after October 12th, because they had to move on for the Dasara. So after the Dasara has been done, we will be looking on to it. But right now the Supreme Court had decided to consider when it will hear the multiple review petitions. As more and more petitions has been following on the verdict of the Sabarimala, the Supreme Court is now listing to when they have to list on to the kind of petitions which has been filed before the Supreme Court. So here it's basically understanding to here the list of reviewing the petition would be happening by the Supreme Court right now. So once the listing has been done, the urgent listing would be taken into consideration and the petitions would be moved on as per the way it has to move on. So right now this just understand that the Supreme Court is listing today to understand the petitions to what has been coming from the Sabarimala. That's it. There's no takeaway out of it something, but you have to understand with the Sabarimala issue when it started, how the development happened with respect to September 28 verdict, what are the after effects. So why is people denying? You need to think from all holistic views, and you need to have your answers to be in a wide aspect. You cannot have a narrowism on one particular topic. The time you have a narrowism, which means that you would forget about thinking as an administrator from all spheres. So you have to ensure that what is happening, what are the different people making the statements, why are people coming up with the petitions, what is the government stand, what is the Supreme Court trying to act, is it acting very immediately, or is it taking the time to review each and every kind of a movement from the people or to the state, what is the state's reactions. All those things you have to keep it under observation. The time you keep it under observation, this entire concept of the Sabarimala issue, you get it as in lump sum. So any questions on that or any essays, you have to present it, which means that you'll have a lot of points. You can talk about different stakeholders on one particular issue, and that is one of the reasons to why we are taking this issue again and again to give one or the other point, so that you can jot it out and you can have a lump sum of the points when you write up with your answers. But there's no such takeaways from this particular news item, as I said earlierly, but just that it's a transition news, it is under the development. You should keep knowing till the issue is being ended off. So that's about it. And moving on to the next news item, why are media regulators soft with scribes? Supreme Court's ask. So here the Supreme Court is actually said that the media regulators, so we are talking about the media regulators, where the Supreme Court is telling that they tend to wear a velvet fist inside a velvet gloves. So here it is actually talking about dealing with the journalist and media organizations whose actions like revealing the identity of a rape survivor make them criminally liable. So it's about like what kind of a reporting the medias are doing and how it might affect the survivors in return and other people's in return. So here they're saying that they're just wearing the velvet fist inside a velvet glove. So there's one important aspect here. It said that it is a crime under the POCSO Act and the Indian Penal Code to disclose the identity of the victims of the sexual abuse, especially if they are the children. But here the media have been exposing them on, and this is what the Supreme Court is asking to why is this being done, because this actually disclosing such kind of an identity is a victims of an sexual abuse is purely a kind of an criminal charges. It is a crime actually as per the IPC as well as the POCSO as well. So this is one of the concern to what the Supreme Court had raised against the media regulators, and it also said that the regulating bodies, let's say it is PSC, the Press Council of India, or the Editors Guild of India, or the National Broadcasting Standard Authority and the Indian Broadcasting Federation. So they have not shown the responsibility to inform the police when a journalist or a media that commits such crime in course of a reportage. So just in the term of reporting an issue, these people are committing the crimes, but none of the organizations which used to be called as in media regulators or statutory bodies, they're not being taking the responsibility to inform the police in written. So this was one of the concern to what the Supreme Court had brought in, and here it also said that orally that it was not enough on the part of these statutory as well as the independent bodies, most of them which should be headed by the retired judges. So here they have to come up with the norms to deal with an errant journalist. So they have to come up with certain areas and guidelines, and also the norms where they have to tell them this is what the boundaries would and this is what the main target level looks like. So you would not be able to commit a crime just in the name of reporting an issue back into the media. So this is one of the concerns to where the Supreme Court had raised against the media regulators. So that's all about it, and this is like there's often a lot of issues which has been coming from the media, and we also saw the couple of times back in USA where they were also talking about different aspects, and there was one issue which was also talking about Mr. Khashoggi's, right, back in Saudi Arabia. He was a journalist in Britain. So that was like they were giving a framework or a statement, pen is mightier than the words. So all these things are something which is related to the media and also the press. So here when they talk about an aspects of freedom of speech and expression, to what extent can this also be abrogated, or is it to be called as a crime? So this analytical thinking is what you have to do it in written to get a proper understanding and analyze the news in your depth manner. So most of the supports or the other things can be given in terms of an institutions and others as well, but you have to ensure that how would I be personally able to enhance my knowledge. By analytically having that analytical thinking, this would definitely helping you in terms of your main field to what you will be serving as an IAS officer. So you don't have to see this as a news. You have to put yourself there, and you have to think from all spheres to what is there under the articles, the constitutional limits, and you have to take forward the news items. It can't be just one particular news, you know it and make a note of it. That is not the style of what you have to do it in terms of the newspapers. So just be more cautious to whatever is being said. What is the Supreme Court trying to tell? Is it actually breaching the freedom of speech? If it's telling it is a crime, why is it a crime? Do they have any norms? Do they have any kind of regularities or guidelines to what the press and the media has to follow on? So you need to look on to all these aspects, only then you get the lump sum of this particular issue. So analysis should come from the students, because ultimately you are the one who will be writing the exams. So have it in a much more wider way and ensure that the concept is made more clearer, and it has to get it right at the time it is being issued as a news in your news column. So there's one important aspect, so just understand that better. And next one, in urban UP, 87% of the waste from the toilets goes to rivers and agri-land. So here there was a survey which was being conducted by the Center for Science and Environment shows. So this is actually the CSC which has come up with a kind of an analysis, and it has brought certain analysis especially in the streams of UP where you have the Ganga belt. So here they're saying that the urban UP has almost like 80% of the coverage of the toilets. So it is also having with an insufficient sanitation systems, which ensures almost like 87% of the excreta, which brings generating to these particular toilets, and it is actually being dumped into the water bodies or the agriculture lands. So ultimately the coverage of the toilets and also the other insufficient sanitations is being dumped into the wastelands, waste bodies, also the agricultural lands. So this is one of the analysis which had happened in 30 cities by the Center of the, that's the Center for Science and the Environment. So CSE to what I discussed. So that's the one which has made this particular analysis of the 30 cities. So here they were also talking about if this number of toilets or the on-site sanitation system, if this is being built in the state, then there is an increase of exposure, and there will also be an amount of the fecal sludge that might be coming through the new toilets will start generating the swamp of the states. So here they were already concerned with the reports which was releasing, and they said that building more toilets will actually worsen the environmental situation to what we have right now. And we know about the Swachh Bharat mission, it's all about building the toilets, having a good sanitation. But here this report is getting contrary to it, and especially in the UP belt, and saying that building more toilets is actually worsening the environment in return, and also the sanitation and also the manual scavenging situation, because unless and until a sewage connections have been increased from 28% of the households in 30 cities, the situation would not come into the proper connection. So here the sewage connections has to be placed properly, and it has to get a proper outlet. The time it's not getting a proper outlet, the positions or the environment worsening would be in a larger extent. So here the on-site sanitation systems such as the septic tanks or the pit latrines are far more prevalent and are used by 47% of the households. So this is what most of the people, that is the septic tanks and the pit latrines, which would be called otherwise, these are more prevalent than any of the other kind of systems. So here they are saying that this is almost like 47% of the households which is being using. So they have to come up with new kind of unit, and they have to have a proper guidelines to how the sewage treatment has to be done first. So if the sewage treatment is not being done, which means that the pollutions of the waters and the surrounding areas would be in a larger extent. So then there another concern which was being raised, because here this is about the manual scavenging, where the government is saying that manual scavenging would not be allowed. So without a sewage system, the effluent from the septic tank along with the grey water from the kitchens which is coming from, and also the bathroom floors, are into the storm water drains and open drains and also the nulls. So this is actually the facial sludge on the other hand. This has become a periodically emptied one. They have to periodically empty from the septic tank either manually, or they have to do it in a mechanical way by using the vacuums. So it might be the trucks or it might be the tankers in return. So here the CSE is actually analyzing, and it found that half of all the emptying work in these cities is done manually. So they are not using the trucks or the particular tankers in terms of vacuums to clean up. It is being done manually. Despite there is a legal prohibition of the employment of the manual scavengers, this is how the cleaning procedure is been happening periodically, because they have to empty it. That's how it has to move on. So this is how this position is right now. So if this is the position, how can we further move on and look on for a proper environment? So this is becoming a challenging right now, and they were also saying that there are no designated site for the disposal in return, because the main problem here is that we don't have a designated site, or we don't know to where is that we have to do it. Do we really have a guidelines to follow when it comes to the designated sites? So here the emptied fecal sludge, it actually end up into the open drains, the open fields, the nullars, which eventually lead to polluting the Ganga and the other rivers in return. So here this is one of the main concerns to what they are saying, that ultimately since they don't have a proper designated site of proper disposal, this is getting end up into the Ganga and the other rivers and other water bodies in return, and this was one of the main concerns why the water bodies are being also getting polluted in return. So here the researchers have actually mapped for the 6 months for the excreta flow diagrams for 30 cities, which has actually been divided for the flow clusters by the population content. So if you see here in the cities which is over 10 lakh, especially in the Lucknow, Kanpur and Agra, the sewage systems which is actually covering 44% of the population. So here only 28% of the wastewater is actually being safely treated, and the third of the population is dependent on the septic tanks. So most of the populations have been depending on the septic tanks which have been connected to the open drains. So while 4% of the population are still being using the open defecation. So here it's not been ODF right now, it's still the defecate in the open areas, and overall the 44% of the waste which is being generated is safely treated and managed. So overall only 44% of the waste is being treated and it is being managed the way it has to be done. The majority of it is getting diverted to different areas on the water septics and also the other water bodies and Ganga, which is getting polluted in Britain. So the situation is more worse when compared to the urban. The smaller cities have been terming to be more worse because here the populations which is ranging between 5 or 10 lakh. So there are more than 70% of the population which is depending on the tanks which are connected to the open drains. So here most of the populations have been depending more on the tanks that are connected to the open drains, and half of them have actually have a qualifying to have a septic tanks. So here the 5 cities of this cluster, only the Jhansi was designated with a disposal site. So apart from that, the others sites were not being designated the way it has to be on, and overall there were only 18% of the waste and the sludge which was being safely managed. So the management of the sludge was also not being done up to the mark. It was just a margin of 18% of the waste which is being managed in a safe manner. So this is about it. And here the cities with a population between 1.2 lakh and 5 lakh, that is only 9% of the waste and the sludge are being safely managed. So while there are 4th cluster of the cities whose populations are less than 1.2 lakh, that the figure which has been dropped to 4%. So when it comes to in terms of the management of the waste and the sludge, we have still not been up to the mark. It's not been safely managed, or it's taking a path towards the water bodies, and that becomes one of the reasons to why the Ganga and the other rivers which have been polluted in terms of the water pollutions which has been happening in a larger extent. And here this is again a very important aspect when it comes to your environment chapter. There are different kinds of pollution. So there is one such chapter subtopic called as water pollution. So this water pollution, which is important for your preliminary exams and also for your mains examination, which takes up with your part 3, that's a general studies paper 3. So here you should know like what is a problem, why the waters have been getting polluted, and what are the measures the government has come up with right now. So when you list out all these answers, your answers becomes completely a lump sum answer, and this would be more attractive because you are analyzing from the bottom to the top. So this how you are analyzing, and these kind of an current affairs can be an added advantage to you. So while in mentioning more of the CSC data, the time you mentioned to be as a CSC, that is the Science Center for Science and Environment, your answer becomes more much of data factored, because here you're not just vaguely telling this is what is a condition, rather you're talking about a report or the content which has been released by the government as per the CSC which has been released. By giving these kind of data, your answer becomes more it actually adds a value to your answers with more of data. So that's all about your this particular news items is dealing only with the water pollutions and also the poor sanitation system to what is there in India. And here you have the untreated sludge. So this is whatever we discussed right now, this is giving a basic understanding to what is the problem. So you can just look on to this particular analysis. And then we have the next news items. The experts group to cut school bag weight formed, the court told. So here we have the HRD ministry which has informed the Madras High Court on Monday that they have to come up with an expert group that has been constituted to formulate a draft policy and also reducing the weight of the school bags in proportion to the age and average weight of the children. So we know that from those days, which means that the school children especially, they used to take up with a huge amount of books onto their shoulders, and you can see them beeping down into the floors in return. So this was like looking on for, this was actually the event spoken about in 2006 to reduce the school bag weight, and here the HRD has come up where the direction has been coming from the Madras High Courts, and they wanted to constitute a expert group where they have to come up with formulating a draft policy, and they have to reduce the weight of the school bags in proportion to the age as well as the average of the weight of the children. So hereafter the age and the average weight of the child has to be taken into consideration, and then the school bag has to be carried on. So this is a draft policy which has been coming right now. So they're saying that it has to be done, and here the MHRD has actually issued an order on October 5th. This is to formulate on the lines of the children's school bags limitations on the weight bill of 2006, which never turned into a law. As I told you all earlier also this was there, but it never became a law in written. So this was also one of the area to why they are trying to focus much on it, and they wanted to have a nationwide policy on the permitted weight. So this is a nationwide policy which has been getting onto. This was one of the aspects which was being filed by the advocate M. Purushottam. So as Mr. M. Purushottam, he filed a writ petition. So this was brought forth, and the centre is now putting forth and asking for the nationwide policy of the permitted pact. So this is about the concern. So mainly they are talking about reducing the school bag weights of the child. So here the reporting which has been compiled, which is respected to Assistant Solicitor General, and there is also few people under the expert group, that is also the professor from that is Ranjana Arora, that's NCRT group people. They will also be one of the convener of the expert group. So this is about it, and you should also know that there were two states, that is Maharashtra and Telangana. They already had this kind of a policy which was been put on to place, where they were stipulating that the school bag should not exceed 10% of the weight of the student. So this was the orders which is back in brought by the Maharashtra and Telangana. So this was also placed before the court, and this was setting as an example that this was something where it was already being done. So this was taking these into consideration. They would be moving further to take up to how is that they have to reduce the the kind of a weight in the school bags. So this can actually look on for a betterment of the people, the children's, and even they carrying an unnecessary weight to, it's not actually required to. So this can be reduced to a large extent. So this was all about it. Once again, this news is in transition right now. So as we move on with more and more, as a draft policy is being prepared, the time it comes onto the bill, then your work it becomes more confined and consigned, and you have to look on more of the features, the negatives, the positives, and you have to come up with a conclusion, the way forward in written, if it is not a right bill to be introduced, or if it has been done, or what is the betterment that we can do it on this particular bill. So that's about it. And moving on to the next news item, the lower judiciary vacancy is unacceptable, the Supreme Court. So here the Supreme Court has actually taken up with a suo motu cognizance of over 5,000 vacancies in the lower judiciary across the country, saying that the situation is completely unacceptable. Because if you see here, the total number of seats, that is 22,003, that is 36 are vacant, and here the posts which has been completely out are with respect to 5,133 posts. So 5,000 vacancies are there in the lower judiciary, and this was across the country, and they are saying, the Supreme Court is saying this is something where it is unacceptable. So here the official data statistics which has been provided by the high courts on the recruitment procedures underway, they were not specific and they were not been updated, and they said that the Supreme Court wanted a specific and updated information by October 31st from the high courts. So here this was one of the important concerns, and they were also talking about a mismatch of the figures to what is being given, and they were also talking about the fillage of to be as 4,180 of the vacancies. They're saying that it is actually being recruited, and somehow the data is also showing on to the other way, that 1,324 out of them, that is out of 5,133 vacancies, only this is what they have to look on for the start. So they were also, the Supreme Court was also on to an opinion that this particular aspects or a data to which is been coming as the official statistics had a lot of mismatches in written. So this is a concern right now, and they were also looking on that to whatever is being mentioned, the figures, they are now asking it to be looked on to the register of this court. So the register of the court will now direct the register in terms of filing a writ petition as well to what it has to be done, and the Supreme Court had asked the High Court's registries to provide a Secretary General, the Supreme Court, with an information that how the recruitment process has commenced, when the appointments would be made, whether it is a time specified one, or they going to complete on a ongoing process, or they have to shorten it on what is that they have to do. So this entire concept has to be conveyed to the Supreme Court by the registries. So this is the main concept, and they're looking out for a proper kind of information, and they wanted the vacancies to be filled at the earliest part. So the lower judiciary cannot be left out without a proper number of things, because there's so many cases which is actually been pending. So the cases which is being pending is something where it has to be taken into consideration at the right time. So this is where the Supreme Court had made a statement telling that this has to be looked on, and the registries are the ones who will be having a petition. They would be filing a petition and also giving the details to what is being done, when it is being done, what is the recruitment procedure, and what has to be taken into further do. So that's all about the judiciary vacancies here. And moving on to the next news item, Rijuju turns up at last minute for security pact with China. So here this actually they were calling it to be as a dramatic kind of a signing, because here the Rijuju, that is the Minister of Science, is actually ailing from it was a kind of an internal security agreement they had to sign with China. So this particular timings and a lot of confusions were there, and there was a statement where they're saying that it was full of dramatic thing, but that's not a requirement for UPSC for us. But our understanding is that now a formal signing which has been done on the internal security of the agreement with China and India. So you should know this news item, which was back in the other particular newspapers as well. So it's just a continuation of the story to what we are saying, but right now they've signed an agreement. So here the agreement has been signed for the cooperation between and for also the betterment of the coordination and the Chinese, which has been coming in the years. And here the time when they signed an agreement, they also spoke about the China, which is actually blocking the designation of Jaish-e-Mohammed, that is actually a chief Masood Jafar, who is an international terrorist, but they are stopping them before the UN Sanctions Committee. They are not been allowing to be designated this person to be as a terrorist. So this was this concern between India and China was also being discussed out here, and the two sides, they also discussed the issues of the mutual consent, that is the interest, which would be including the bilateral counter-terrorism cooperation, and they also welcomed increased cooperation between India and China with the area of the security operation. So here, apart from the internal security agreement between India and China, these were the other areas to what they had also been spoken about. So this is about it. So right now, for internal security, India and China, they have signed an agreement. So that's it. And the next news item, an African highland at troubled waters. So actually there is one island, that is Minjingo Island. So this is actually the area which has been a conflict between two countries, that is Uganda and Kenya, because here they have not been able to claim to which part, either it's belonging to Uganda or is it belong to Kenya. So there's a confusion on this particular Minjingo Island, which is actually a rounded rocky top crop covered with a metallic stacks. So these are features of this particular island in written. So here in early 2000s they were actually inhabited. So here they're situated, in sense the maps of world to whatever we are talking about. So this particular Minjingo Island was situated within Kenya. So this was early in 2000s. So this was actually drawing the attention of the Ugandan authorities, and they had sent certain officials to the Minjingo, and they actually taxed the fishermen's back in. So as the taxes had been taxed on the fishermen of the Minjingo, and they also offered the protection against the piracy. So here the Kenyan fishermen, they had given a complaint to the government back in, and they were talking about the Ugandas who are trying to give them the trouble in their own place. So here the Kenyan government had actually deployed the security forces for the Minjingo, and they also ensured that the two nations to blow in 2019. So here they want to actually settle out, because here the Uganda is claiming was under the confusion to whom does it belong, and the Kenyan government had a map where it shows that the Minjingo belongs to Kenya. So this is a concern, but here there was also, they decided to create a joint commission. It's in both the countries, Kenya and Uganda, as more and more issues started on, they came up with a joint commission, but the water borders, but they were not being able to do, because they took a reference of 1920s and where the interpretation of the key point in the contention, but they were not able to, and the decision was not been coming from there. So Ireland had actually co-managed by both the countries right now. So the issue right now is that the local Kenyan politicians have actually called the Nairobi to give this case to the International Court of Justice to intervene and make a decision on the border of the parts, whether does it belong to Uganda or does it belong to Kenya. So here the main concept, why is it in the news right now, is that they wanted it to move on to the ICJ, and the ICJ has to give a confirmation to what it is, whether it belongs to Kenya or whether it belongs to Uganda. And here the fishermen were also talking about that we don't know to what has been happening, whether it's belonged to Kenya or whether it belongs to Uganda. The concern for them were that it was purely a political issue. They're least bothered about it, and they just want to sell their fish, and they have to know to what is their livelihood. So without any trouble between both the countries, they wanted to lead their life in a peaceful manner. So that was all about the concern. So now this further developments we could see in near future, as this is important to your prelims as well as for your mains, especially in the prelims. As you can see from the past analysis, there were different kinds of questions where the UPSC has been taking from the world column and they are asking certain names in terms of match the following. So, if at all you get the term called Mijingo Highland, understand to it they are talking with respect to the issuers Kenya and Uganda. By the time you attend your 2019 preliminary, if the ICJ gives a verdict it belongs to Uganda or Kenya, that you have to get updated. So, by now you can know what is a Mijingo Highland, what is the features of it, so that any questions pertaining to it you will be able to do better. So, that is about it. And moving on to the next news item, the direct tax base widens sharply over 4 years, compliance rises. So, it is about the data which has been showing about the direct tax collection, which is actually doing pretty good out here. So, that is about the thing. So, here they were saying that it has actually widened since the last few years, which is the data which has been released by the government, and there were almost like 80% in the number of the returns which was being filed in the last 4 years. And they were also talking about there was a continuous increase in the income which was being declared in the returns which was being filed by the categories of the taxpayers over the last 3 years assessments, and this is the number of the figures which is showing to you all. And furtherly moving on with respect to the compliance, so there was a good number of turnout which has been there because of the legislative and also the administrative measures which has been taken by the present government. As the government had taken all these measures, there is a good collections of the direct taxes, and they said that there are actually 4 reasons why it should actually increase with the tax reasons. One is with respect to demonetization. Secondly, here the increase in the information was being collected with a digitally aspects, and this is being used for the by the tax department, and here they had actually moved towards a digital assessment, and they also increased the number of cases which has been picked up for the scrutiny. First thing, it is demonetization. Secondly, it is with respect to digital assessment, and this was a main concept with respect to the 4 reasons to what is being spoken out here, and this was the main concerns, and this was one of the areas why the particular concepts or a kind of an tax collection which has been actually increased in a larger extent. So, this is about it, and here the overall number of taxpayers, especially which is including the corporates, firms, the Indo undivided families which are declaring an income which would be above 1 crore a year, that showed a sharp growth over the last 3 years which has been there under the considerations. So, here the incomes, in sense the individual taxpayers disclosing an income which would be above 1 crore, which has been increased during the period, and this is again a good transitions with almost like 68% of the growth to what they have been showing. So, the data is also showing an improvement in the compliance of the salary taxpayers, and is also been increased over the time, and the average income which is also been declared by the taxpayers is also been increasing. Overall, the individuals paying the taxes, returning, or a salaried person who has been having above 1 crore or anything about that, or increasing or talking about the returns or filing for returns which has been increased in our overall contents. So, here they were also talking about non-salaried individual taxpayers as well. So, when this has been increased, and this has also been rose with 27% from to whatever we call it in the past. So, here the overall of the taxed salaried and also the non-salaried individual taxpayers has also been getting increased in a larger extent. So, this is about the concepts with respect to which has been talking about the direct taxpayers which has been comparatively increased from the results. So, here you have the data, and you have the financial year for 14, 15, 16, 17 and 18, which is showing the differences to what it has been done. So, this is about it. And moving on to the next news item, the Z-Bags US patent to provide the viewers immersive experience. So, here is actually the Z which has come up, which has actually secured the United States patent on having a technological platform which would be built on the technologies such as the 3D audio, augmented reality, the virtual reality, digital scent, holograms and touch. So, these are the main important technology platforms to what the Z would be performing in a better in near futures, because it wants to satisfy the viewers in all the 5 senses. So, all this 3D audit and augmented reality, virtual reality, digital scent and the holograms and touch, all these things can be felt, and these are the 5 senses to what the Z wants us to give it to its viewers. So, this is actually, as we said, the 5 senses, the touch, smell, experience, feel, with a seamless transition of economics is being possible with the present scenarios. And here they were also talking about they wanted to have a comprehensive technology platform, so that they wanted to give it a single place. So, the need for every single viewer has to be filled up to be as a more comprehensive. That is what they wanted to look on out here. And here the overall media landscape is actually poised to evolve at an extremely rapid pace. So this has to have a content companies which is actually blending with the technological companies. So this content companies are being moving with the technology companies, and this is getting transforming, and they wanted to transform the media and the entertainment powerhouse to a technological company. So by moving on to a technological company, and here they would be able to give the best to its viewers. So this is all about it. By getting this US patent, it will be able to do wonders in terms of the media sectors. So that's about it. So that's it. The same thing there is what they're talking about here. They wanted to give a treat to the viewers on total, and these are the main basic technology to what they're talking about. And the next news item, that gut feeling on probiotics. So actually probiotics is actually a microorganisms which would be injected into the body to actually ensure that certain kind of an any kind of an illness to what has been associated can be reduced to a larger extent. So here the issue right now is that it has been said that the Harvard University, which is saying that so you can see here the Harvard Medical School, it's saying that it also has some harms as well as benefits as well. So this immune compromised individuals, for instance, these probiotics can also lead certain infections, because basically you should know that the bacteria which is in the gut, it is actually a key to the good health. So this is actually where it is ingesting the cultures of the living organisms. So this is actually treat to the host of the conditions, and nowadays you can see that the probiotics are being actually marketed in the foods, capsules, and even in the beauty products. So the wide usage of the probiotics is being taken into consideration as more and more it is being used. So here the Harvard Medical School has come up with an kind of a report and the analysis. It's stating that it does also have certain harms in it. So actually the probiotics have been a potential to improve the health, which is including by displacing the potentially harmful bugs. So it has a capacity where it can displace harmful bugs, and the trouble is that the proven benefits involve a very small number of conditions, and probiotics are regulated less tightly than the drugs. So here anything proven benefits has been very lesser out here. So when comparatively to the drugs, we still don't know to what extent does this particular probiotics will definitely work on. So here this is actually most obviously given to the treatments of gastrointestinal disorders, and this is actually focused on the gut health. The more and more the gut had been more healthier, the other problems associated with the gut can be completely stopped. So we are actually talking about the stomach part, that's called as in gut here. So actually they are talking about here, and they also said that by using these particular probiotics, it can be useful in preventing the diarrhea among the children which has been prescribed for the antibiotics. And in 2013 review, it also said that it can also prevent the Clostridium difficile associated diarrhea as well. So this review, which has been focused on the acute infections diarrhea, which was been found to be a benefit, and this has been against certain, again in terms of a certain strains of the bacteria at a controlled doses. So here this is purely in terms of the bacteria strains which would be on a controlled doses, which would be able to prevent the infections in terms of diarrheas as well. But again, there are also evidence that they may help in necrotizing the enterocolitis and death in preterm of the infants as well. So here there is also an evidence where the death in preterm infants might also be associated, but here it did not actually, if you have to look on for the lack of evidence to why we are talking about. So here it's saying that it did not show a significant benefit for the chronic diarrhea. So there's no such kind of an benefits was given when the diarrhea is getting moved on to the next stage of the chronic level. So these three reviews looked at how the probiotics might improve the Crohn's disease, and none could find a sufficient evidence in written. So as to be recommended for the use in the further part. And coming back to it, it is also reviewed that the ulcerative colitis and similarly declared that we do not have a data showing that they really work. So here there is a conflict in terms of the probiotics which has been used to do a good health, a gut health, and again it's saying that we don't have an evidence that it's proven to be as a benefit in written. There are some areas which has been there, but in an ultimate chronic diarrhea it's still not been working. So this is a concern to which has been raising right now, and they're also saying that it was an insufficient evidence to recommend to the use of treat and also prevent the eczema, preterm labor, gestational diabetics, bacterial vaginosis, allergic diseases or urinary tract infections. So they didn't have a sufficient evidences where they can start recommending for the use of these kind of an, whether to prevent them, all these kinds of an aspect to what we just read. So they're not been sure about it. And they were also talking about the reviews which were looking at the treatment or prevention of the vulvovaginal candidiasis in women and pneumonia in the patients had hooked up the respiratory and colds in otherwise healthy people, which are showing some positive results. So, but again the studies almost been very low quality, some small in size, and most of the time it was being funded by the companies. So obviously there will be a conflict of interest as well. So the company promotions might also be there, so they were not being sure and they were not being able to assure it or recommend to the further use for it, because it also has some certain kinds of harms in it. So when the researcher had done on the probiotics, it had actually involved a specific organisms defined by genes, species and even the strains. So when it is used in studies, they are pure and carefully dosed, but when we move on for the product buy, so that the time we get into buy the products from the shelf, no idea whether we are getting to what is being tested at the time to what is being tested out. So here this is giving a kind of a confusional area from the first product to the end product. Is it what is that we are exactly been getting, because at different levels the dosages and different aspects which is being changing, because there's a change in the kind of a level or using a chemicalized ones, how they transform it and how they deliver it to the people in return, what are the preservatives they're using, what it might be affecting them in return. These clear pictures we still not been aware of it. So here they're saying that probiotics is a one which is injected as a microorganisms where it can give a good gut health, but again there is also a suspect that they might also have an harmness in the part. So that is still not been clear. So that's all about the analysis to what is being done out of this particular gut feeling on the probiotics. So this about it. So this becomes a play of your science and technology. So science and technology comes under your preliminary part of question as well as for your part 3 GS3, which deals with the science and technology concept. So these questions you have to know what is your takeout, and there might be a questions and the features of the probiotics as well, so that you can get it more in touch with. So this is about it, and moving on to the question for the day. So here we have the questions. So you have to consider the following statements: an intermediate range nuclear force treaty, INF treaty, formally treaty between the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics on the elimination of their intermediate range and a short range missiles. Does it really deal with that in sense of intermediate nuclear, that is INF treated as a deal? Secondly, this treaty is being conveyed on a sea launched missiles. Is it correct? And thirdly, the INF treaty eliminated all nuclear and conventional missiles. So as well as their launches that range between 500 to 1000 kilometers and 1000 to 5000 kilometers range. So you have to pick up the correct answers and put it into the comment section. And you should know that this was one of the news which was being presently there. So that is what which has been framed as a question to check your knowledge to how well you understood and which are the points you have been missed out in reading up with the newspaper. So put your answers into the comment section as I told you. So you have to use either of these codes, right? So that's all about it, and these were the important news items to what is being picked up from the Hindu newspaper, and these are the main things to what you have to prepare for your UPSC. So that's all about it, and thank you.